Good evening to all of you. Good evening to, on behalf of Director Niaz, on my own behalf, I'm very happy to welcome all of you for this evening's public lecture. I'm happy a number of you have managed to come. We were a bit worried with the Bandh and other things, whether some of you will be inconvenienced. But then obviously Ambassador Haqqani is a very, very popular speaker, it appears, and has managed to attract a good crowd. India, Pakistan, bound together by both history and geography. It's always interesting to know what we can learn from the past and what is the way forward. And to speak on this, we have a very, very eminent speaker, Ambassador Husain Haqqani, who served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United States between 2008 to 2011, besides various other capabilities. He has been a journalist, he has been an academic, he has been a diplomat, he has been advisor to 4 Pakistani Prime Ministers, I understand. He is a prolific writer. He writes, I think, for the Indian Express, among other papers, and has authored 2 books. His book in 2005, Between Mosque and Military, was acclaimed for explaining the roots of Pakistan's foreign and domestic policies. His recent book, Magnificent Delusions, US, Pakistan and the Global Jihad, has come out in November, has also received very rave reviews. Just before this meeting, we had the pleasure of some of us interacting with him, and we were highly impressed by his very candid and deep, in-depth views on various issues. I'm sure we'll all benefit from the talk that he's going to give. May I invite Ambassador Husain Haqqani to come and give us his talk on India-Pakistan relations and the way forward. Ambassador Haqqani, please.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that very kind introduction. It's a pleasure being here in Bangalore and to see all of you in the audience, despite the many emails and Twitter messages I received from people warning me of a bandh in town. And when I got some of these messages, I replied to them, just a bandh? It's something that one can be can get used to relatively easily. It was not going to detract me from coming and speaking, and I'm so glad that it hasn't detracted you from coming and listening. Pakistan and India have centuries of shared history. And Indians and Pakistanis, whenever they interact outside of the subcontinent, they often interact with great friendship. They interact with great friendship because they share many, many things, from cuisine to clothes to, at least for one part of India, the language. And above all, whenever they confront somebody else, they find that the rest of the world looks at them as people from the subcontinent. So in London, you can find a restaurant which serves Indian/Pakistani cuisine. And you know that Indian is first, so therefore the owner of the restaurant must be Indian. And then down the road, you find another one where it says Pakistani/Indian cuisine, and you know this is the owner that's from Pakistan. Of course, the Bangladeshis have it much easier because they write Bangladeshi, Indian and Pakistani cuisine. At the end of the day, each one of them is serving the same dal, the same chawal, the same chapatis. The people from the south, all of you are blessed because your cuisine at least is a little more diverse and does not fall into this very simple categorization of Indian/Pakistani/Bangladesh cuisine that's sold abroad. So before I talk about India and Pakistan, let me just say that India and Pakistan are prisoners of history in terms of their relationship with one another. Despite the fact that we have centuries of shared history, the last 67 years overshadows our relationship. And the last 67 years have been overshadowed by the preceding 7 years of the freedom struggle. The events leading to partition involved conflict between two rival political parties, the Indian National Congress and the All India Muslim League. After partition, two countries had been created and it was time for both to start thinking of how to persist as friends, as neighbors. Historically, many countries have been divided. Many new countries have been carved out of old ones. There are many countries which have overlapping languages and cultures. You can speak French in Belgium, you can speak French in France, and they accept the fact that they are two separate countries. And we should too have done the same at that time. There was some talk of joint defense and a customs union. With hindsight, that may have been best for both countries. That they would have continued with the common elements that they had, a lot of openness in the borders, cultural overlap, and an economy that was virtually integrated after all until 1947. But that didn't happen. And it is my contention that what happened was that the political conflict between the Congress and the Muslim League ended up becoming the political conflict and the philosophical conflict between India and Pakistan. India, as a state, inherited the mantle of the Congress in its worldview towards the neighbors, in particular, especially Pakistan. And Pakistan's worldview was shaped by the Muslim League. So, for example, the Muslim League had demanded Pakistan on the basis of the two-nation theory, and the Muslim League tried to govern Pakistan with the same sentiment of the two-nation theory. One of Pakistan's leaders, whom I have grown to actually admire with hindsight, was Husain Shahid Sohrawardi, a former premier of Bengal, United Bengal. And in March 1948, he delivered a speech in Pakistan's Constituent Assembly that sounds like an article written in 2013, if not 2014. He talks about how if Pakistan continues to think of itself as a nation that is going along with an ideological agenda, Pakistan would come to grief and India-Pakistan relations would not stabilize. So Sohrawardi said that the slogan "Islam in Danger" had helped create Pakistan. And he's talking in March 1948, so that's only 6 months after the creation of Pakistan. He says, if we persist with this slogan as a means of keeping our nation together and building a nation, then we will only unleash violence and unhappiness in the subcontinent. With hindsight, it seems that that's what has happened. My view is that India-Pakistan relations will move forward only when both nations transcend the narratives and prejudices that we have inherited from the freedom struggle and from the unfortunate events of partition. It's history. We should discuss it as history, but it should not cast the long shadow it continues to cast on the relationship between two neighboring countries. It's very interesting that both Pakistan's founder Muhammad Ali Jinnah and India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru understood this fact. So when the first American ambassador to Pakistan asked Mr. Jinnah, how do you see the relationship between Pakistan and India as two independent countries in the future? Jinnah replied, I want the relationship between our two countries to be like that between the United States and Canada. Now, those of you who are familiar, the United States and Canada share a huge border. It's not a militarized border. It's a virtually open border. They're both part of the North American Free Trade Association. And there is virtually relatively free movement of people, goods and services across that border. Both accept each other as separate countries. No Canadian wants to be known as an American. No American wants himself to be called a Canadian. But they are two countries and yet are virtually seamless in the way they operate as two countries. So that was what Jinnah said. What did Nehru say? Nehru said, if we had wanted to undo partition, why would we have agreed to it? Now, two countries have been created. We did not want two countries to be created out of the subcontinent, out of what we saw as United India. But now two countries have been created. And what we want is a stable Pakistan that can be, that has friendly relations with India, and a stable Pakistan would be in India's interest. It is important to note that the view that a stable Pakistan is in India's interest has also been reiterated by India's recently elected Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So what went wrong? I would say that many of the issues between India and Pakistan defy logic. These are psychological issues, not logical issues. Quite often, my countrymen talk about the disputes between the two countries. A long list is often given. Our first military dictator, Field Marshal Ayub Khan, used to say that there are only two disputes between India and Pakistan, Kashmir and Indus waters. If these two are solved, our dispute is over and we will live happily ever after. Well, the Americans and the British got very involved. Everybody got involved to try and solve the Indus waters dispute. It was an easier dispute to solve because it had a technical solution. Whenever, and some of you are scientists, you will appreciate, when there is a technical solution available, it's easier to negotiate on the basis of the technical solution. But the rest of the disputes, real or even in the view of some people contrived, they are all issues that require political solutions. And I would contend that the disputes between India and Pakistan, whether it's Kashmir, whether it's Siachen, whether it's the circuit demarcation, or whether it's the periodic debate over the Indus waters, or even though we have a treaty, that none of these are the cause of poor relations between India and Pakistan. They are just the symptom of poor relations. The relationship is poor because of a lack of trust and because of certain ideological compulsions that have been introduced into the relationship since the very beginning. Especially in Pakistan, where the military's domination has ended up creating an environment in which India is described as a permanent and existential threat to Pakistan. The fact is that as Professor of International Relations, I always teach or begin teaching international relations by telling my students that there are no permanent friends or enemies in international relations. And since the relationship between nations is dynamic, therefore the very notion of an existential threat or a permanent threat is a flawed notion. And that notion, unfortunately, has been introduced in this relationship. And we have seen for many, many years a diplomatic dance between the two sides. You know, if this can be done, then we will move forward. Well, we move forward 2 steps, then something else goes wrong, then we fall back 2, 3, 4 steps, then you move half a step forward and everybody says there's forward progress. If each of our countries received a $1 billion for each time they announced progress between relations, we'd both be very rich countries by now. Because the progress is only relative. You know, things go so bad that when you have a new round of talks, everybody writes. You know, if the smarter journalists, and I'm sure there are journalists sitting here, the smarter journalists probably have the story already written. And they just change the name of the foreign secretaries and everybody and says, you know, after the such and such incident, you just insert the incident and say relations became bad and now a new round has started and we are going to make progress again. But really we have not made much progress. We are kind of stuck in a 2 steps forward, 2 steps backward situation. My recommendation And I will explain it to you during the course of my presentation and then also during questions and answers that I hope will be forthcoming. I say that it is time to replace the diplomatic dance approach with the great leap forward approach. Instead of having this sort of, approach of we need to take baby steps, one step at a time, structured dialogue, composite dialogue, each side keeps coming up. And by the way, one of the advantages of having the British rulers is that we've all learned English, so we can all come up with new terminology to make ourselves and others feel good with words. This is happening and there's going to be a new round. There's official level talks and ministerial level talks, and then we have summits every now and then. But what we need is the great leap forward. And what would be the great leap forward? The great leap forward would be what one of Pakistan's great friends, China, its president said to the Pakistani parliament in December 1996. Jiang Zemin was the president of China. He arrived in Pakistan and he addressed Pakistan's parliament. And he said, "We advise our friends to set aside issues that cannot be resolved immediately so that relations can continue to move forward." Now, the Chinese, they in their diplomatic interaction, they're very cautious with the choice of words. They're very they parse their words very carefully. But what was he really saying? He was advising the Pakistani side not to insist on resolution of disputes, not to insist first Kashmir, then something else, but to normalize relations and move on. And I think the great leap forward would be to recognize that there will be greater benefits in cooperation for both countries and in moving forward by normalizing relations at all levels, and not do them piecemeal as we have done, in which each time there are loopholes that one side or the other later on complains about. Now, obviously, for the great leap forward, it is very important that the shadow of terrorism should disappear from the subcontinent. In the presence of terrorism, there would be hardly any progress achieved in trying to mend fences and become normal friends and partners. Terrorism has been has caused a lot of pain to India, and it has also started causing a lot of pain to Pakistan. In the last couple of years, more Pakistanis have died as a result of terrorist attacks than have Indians. So anybody who sits in Pakistan and thinks, or anywhere else, in Afghanistan or wherever else, and thinks that terrorism will advance political agendas or ideological agendas, must realize that terrorism is just a beast that comes back to bite those who help it and who nourish it. Pakistan and India have already achieved nuclear deterrence. So neither side needs to be worried about the prospect of the other actually causing irreparable damage to themselves. For example, if there are people in Pakistan who for years have said, and in Pakistan you're taught in schools this thing, that Indians want to finish off Pakistan. Well, they can't anymore because they would risk nuclear war. So the nuclear deterrence has been achieved. Once nuclear deterrence is achieved, you need to move into the phase of mutual reassurance. That's what happened between the Soviet Union and the United States. That's what happened between the United States and China. That's what's happened between NATO countries and the Soviet Union. All nuclear powers have always moved after achieving deterrence from into the phase of achieving mutual assurance. And mutual assurance can only come about if the subconventional level of warfare does not exist, because instead of the normal two tiers of nuclear and conventional, if you introduce a third, subconventional, which is terrorism, then you create a new level of instability, because after all, anybody trying to take on this terrorist menace by conventional means risks escalating the war to the nuclear level. So terrorism is the real problem here that undermines the prospect of reassurance coming after deterrence, and has made it difficult for our two countries to move forward at the level of mutual assurance. Conventional nuclear theory always is that two sides having nuclear weapons capability essentially are in a situation called mutually assured destruction. And that mutually assured destruction is, of course, a prospect that prevents both sides from using force beyond a certain level. In case of India and Pakistan, the presence of terrorism creates the instability in the relationship because the subconventional level is something that is unpredictable and keeps bringing us to the brink every few years. For the last 2 decades, it has always been an event-driven relationship because of that, because you just cannot have a stable paradigm of relations. Now, in the past, another factor has been affecting our relationship. That has been the involvement of outside powers. And that, of course, has been the result of, again, the Congress Muslim League dynamic. I don't know how many people remember this because this is such a young audience. People might not remember those facts of history. But Congress and during the Congress Muslim League political arguments, the Muslim League always demanded parity with the Congress. And after the creation of Pakistan, in Pakistan, there has been this ideology, more or less, of seeking parity with India. Now, the fact of the matter is that the global system does not provide for parity between nations. Every nation has power proportionate to its size and the various elements of power that it can amass. And so, whatever the ideology, it's not something that is based on reality. That demand for parity has led Pakistan, or that pursuit of parity has led Pakistan to seek the involvement of external powers in compensating for Pakistan's relative disadvantage in size in relation to India. Whether it's armaments from the United States, whether it's assurances from China, all of that has been an effort to try and compensate for relative size. I would recommend and advocate a relationship based on reality rather than on ideology. And if the ideology of parity is set aside and the reality is accepted of the relative size difference, you can still have a very good functioning relationship. There are many countries with disparate sizes that are each other's neighbors and they conduct business with each other and they move forward. One other point I'd like to make is that when I come to India, I always encounter a lot of people, and they usually, I find them falling between two categories. The cynics and skeptics on the one hand, who are convinced that there can never be a good relationship with Pakistan. My apologies for my predisposition to allergies. As you travel, you kind of can't get accustomed to the weather in every town you go to. So I've brought some from Delhi, and there are some things in Bangalore that are causing allergies as well. And so there's the cynics and the skeptics, and then there are the very warm-hearted puppy jappi types, I call them. Usually you find them in the Punjab and in Delhi. And basically these are guys who are eager to just sort of, it's all about having a nice sort of, party together, and let's do bhangra together, and somehow if we dance on the Wagah border or the Wagah-Atari border, everything's fine. These two extremes do not represent reasonableness, in my opinion. I would like to tell the cynics and the skeptics that strategic thinking in Pakistan is changing, but it's changing very slowly. The Pakistani military and intelligence service are the slowest to change. Their worldview does not change fast enough. But there are enough people in Pakistan who do think that Pakistan has come to a point where Pakistan needs to change the way it looks at the world and the way it interacts with the world. The traditional paradigm of Pakistan of using the United States as a compensator for its relatively smaller size vis-a-vis India, using Islamist extremism as a national unifier and also as a subconventional deterrent especially for India. All of that is not something that is widely supported by Pakistan's intelligentsia. It would be wrong of me to say that people like me are in the majority in Pakistan. We are not. But remember that every time you think that there is Hafiz Saeed in Pakistan, also remember that for every Hafiz Saeed there is a Husain Haqqani or an Asma Jahangir as well with a very different view. So Pakistan is undergoing, and after a long time we have some room for democratic debate, some room. We've had the first democratic transition from one elected government to another. The civilian governments are not fully in control of all policy, all levers of policy, but the fact that they exist provides us an opportunity to slowly crack open the paradigm of Pakistan from these fixated notions that come from the debates of the partition era to more contemporaneous notions. Notions of economic cooperation, of attracting investment together, of doing trade, of Pakistan transforming itself from a warrior nation to a trading nation. And India looking at Pakistan as a potential partner in its own drive for regional and international stature as a major economic power and as a world power. Pakistan also faces tremendous prospect of international isolation if Pakistan does not change the policies that we have pursued in the past. I don't know how many people in this room have seen it, but there is a new Pew Foundation poll on global attitudes. They call it the Global Attitude Survey, in which Pakistanis have been stunned to find that approval ratings for Pakistan globally are very low. For example, only 30% of Chinese have a positive view of Pakistan. Now, this is the country which, for many years, we Pakistanis have been told is Pakistan's permanent friend, with a friendship that is taller than the Himalayas and deeper than the deepest ocean. I mean, those are the poetic words that are uttered. But the fact remains that when it comes to looking at the global situation, the Chinese know which way their noodles are buttered. They know where their economic opportunities are, and they would rather go for them than for a country that has tremendous challenges, primarily from the ideological debates within. Where do I see things going? Well, for the short term, we will have the diplomatic dance. We will soon have another round of foreign secretaries' talks. Both sides will keep on issuing the statements that they do. There will be high-level meetings like we had when Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif came for Prime Minister Modi's inauguration. But we will not see real progress until we start paying attention to the underlying issues and change the narrative. As long as Pakistani school children are told that India is Pakistan's eternal enemy, and as long as Indian school children keep on looking at Pakistan as somehow a vivisection of Mother India rather than a country that has now existed for 67 years, we will not be able to find the equilibrium that we need as neighbors. It is time, as I said at the beginning, it is time to distinguish between narratives of history and foreign policy. And the policy option for both India and Pakistan that is most desirable is to acknowledge each other, accept the realities that exist between us, go beyond this piecemeal dispute resolution or postponement of dispute resolution approach, and start interacting as mature neighbors. If Germany and France can overcome the bitterness of 2 world wars and many wars before, surely the conflicts we have had are not even half as disastrous as those 2 nations had. And if the Japanese and the Koreans can overcome their historic baggage, Pakistan and India can do that too. Do I see that happening in the very near future? I will answer that question when one of you asks that in the question and answer session. I'm going to stop here now. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for bearing with my cough and my random thoughts. And I'm very happy and willing to take questions. I think it would be better to sit down and answer the questions instead of standing here, so that I have your watchful eye on me and your guidance. Thank you. Thank you very much.